So I went over to their house and was like, tonight's the night. I'm having my first drink. And they're like, oh, let me give you something. And so they like ran in and gave me a little vial of...
No, it's not a vial. It's a mini bottle.
I keep calling it a vial.
It sounds more evil when you say vial, though. Hey, what's up, guys? It's ex-Morgan with My Spiritual Life, and today I am so excited because I have Kattie and Allan Mount, who are the co-hosts of the podcast Marriage on a Tightrope. Today, they are going to be talking about 6 tips on how to support your believing spouse and 6 tips on how to support your unbelieving or non-believing spouse. Kattie and Allan, I'm so excited to have you guys here. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves for those who don't know who you are.
You're not getting to the introduction before we say thank you, Morgan, for having us on. Yes. And thank you to you and to Jared for, I personally can just say, for the content you guys have put out. I've been a consumer of it, maybe more than Kattie has, which is probably understandable. But we're really excited to be here, and we're happy to talk about the podcast a little bit, and especially mixed faith marriage for those that are in that situation.
Yeah, I guess I'll introduce us. So we're Allan and Kattie Mount. We live in Murray, Utah. We started.
Go Spartans? Is that what it is?
I think so.
We're not from here, neither
We're
of us.
We're not really from here, but we've
adopted
here.
Spartan pride.
They'll let us know in the comments.
That's
right.
Sure. So we have lived. Well, we started the podcast in January of 2018, following Allan's kind of transition out of the church, which was 2016, 2017. And we did it because there really was no resources for us. And so we decided just to put our story out there, and we recorded our first episode, and we didn't hear anything back from Mormon Discussions, Bill Reel. And so we just thought, well, that's that.
You didn't like it.
And then like on a Saturday night, he texted us and said, oh, by the way, your episode's releasing tomorrow. And we were,
oh my gosh,
we were a little bit shocked. I was like, oh no, is it like, can I turn back? Can I decide not to do it anymore? And then it was pretty overwhelming, the response after it was released. And then we just went from there. So we have 4 kids. I don't know what else.
Yeah, I mean, we can go back a little bit further. We have quite the spiritual story, which we won't get into the whole thing, but we met on our mission. So we met in the MTC, and that's right. We met in the
Just kidding.
We went to someone's heart wasn't fully locked. It was hers.
It was mine.
We then went to the same mission and served in Barcelona, Spain. Loved it. I still look back at my days as a missionary with a lot of good feelings, not a lot of bad feelings, which I know not everybody is able to say. And I'm grateful that I can still look at it as a positive experience. But she definitely was one of the most positive outcomes of the mission, this relationship. So we started dating soon after I had returned home, and we're married in the Salt Lake City Temple in December of 2004. So it's been 15 and a half years at this point that we've been married. Like Kattie said, 4 children aged 14 through 6. And our daughter just turned 8 in April. And thank you to COVID, and not trying to make light of a very serious pandemic, but that has kind of pushed off the discomfort of a baptism that is happening.
In fact, we've talked to her a lot about this, and she doesn't want anyone else to do it but Dad, and so that presents some challenges. But we also just got a hot tub last week, and we were in the hot tub, and my son said, Dad, why can't you just baptize Zara here in the hot tub? And all of us were like, nah.
We laughed when
maybe.
That's not a bad idea.
Let's think about that.
That's right. Do it on a cold July evening.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, just now skipping into the podcast, just so what any of those that are listening that haven't listened to the podcast, what you can expect to hear if you go listen to Marriage on a Tightrope are these very real conversations of how do you deal with this baptism. So the way that we deal with it is we sat our daughter down and we interviewed her on the podcast, and we talked to her about, what do you want to happen? Why do you want to be baptized? And we just let her tell her own story. And then I go talk to the bishop and we report back on the podcast and say, this was the conversation. We're very respectful to those that really aren't giving consent to be on the podcast. And it's not like he's going to be on the podcast as an interviewee or something. Yeah, that's right. Interviewee. But those are the types of things that we go through. We had 3 episodes in the Word of Wisdom recently of how that negotiation has worked between the two of us. And was it difficult? The answer is yes. When I wanted to bring alcohol into the house, and I've got a cup of coffee that she hates the smell of, and those types of
but that I'll
things.
make you.
But that she made me just a couple of weeks ago. I was on a conference call right here at this desk with some headphones on, and she knocks quietly at the door, and I open it, and she had brewed me a cup of coffee. And the most annoying part about it was better than the coffee that I make myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not flying my ex-mormon flag very high if my believing wife can make me a wicked cup of coffee.
It was the first time I'd ever made coffee.
She's like,
she can't even taste it to know if it's like good or not.
I know.
You got a magic touch, Katie.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Does. You have a coffee
The
gift.
Irony. Mormons make really good coffee.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Well, and I just have to say too that I love how real you guys are, because it's so easy, like, as being this couple that's kind of representing, like, this position to be in, and it's easy to want to present it all like, yeah, like, we got it all figured out. It's easy to have that facade, but you guys don't. Like, you're just straight up about what things are hard and the emotions behind it. And I just think that is so amazing. It's just so needed. What you guys are doing is so needed. People need that resource, both the believing and the unbelieving or non-believing a person in the relationship really need this kind of thing. So for those who are watching, if you haven't checked out their podcast, you have to. It'll be in the description below. Amazing, amazing, amazing.
Well, thanks. These tips that we're about to share are a result of what you just walked through. Most of them were learned and earned based on mistakes that were made. So we've learned these lessons, many of them the hard way. And so we don't believe that's the way it has to be. I think that you can learn from other people's mistakes without having to make the mistake yourself. So maybe we jump into the tips.
Let's do it. So we'll just alternate, right? So I think it's Alan's got tips for the supporting your believing spouse, and then Katie's got the tips for supporting your non-believing or ex-member spouse. Okay, let's do it. So whoever wants to start, I'm so excited.
Sure. I mean, I'll start just looking. We've got them on the screen right here, and my 6 tips are on the top. So I'll start, and then Katie can do the next one. The first tip is it's how you use your language. So use language like, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, instead of this is true or not true, or this is right and this is wrong. This can be really hard to do with how strongly emotions can run on both sides. But as the non-believing spouse, you have all of these truths that you now have thrown out. So it's so easy to say this is wrong or this is not true. And you absolutely can feel those things and can voice those things in the right ways. However, when talking to your spouse, using terminology of like, I'm having a hard time going to church because it just doesn't work for me anymore. It's more stressful than it is helpful for me. That's much easier for Katie to not only understand, but empathize and sympathize with than I can't go to church because it is not true. It is a fraud. It is a cult. Those types of language are just going to set her alarm bells off.
Right.
And we're just gonna be fighting. So that's tip number 1.
I gotta say that I love that, by the way. And I almost feel like a lot of these tips are gonna help even if you're not married, like, or in a relationship with someone, or like it will help you with your dealing with your family that's still Mormon, because we, as the like Mormons, like we have this, we, in a way, sometimes we think we have this moral high ground of like, well, it's not true, so I can be an asshole. Like, and it's just not
Right.
true. It's not helpful at all, because ultimately ex-Mormons, sometimes they'll have a lot more respect for every other religion than they do Mormonism. And I understand why, right? Because
Absolutely.
there's been so much pain around it. But the important thing to note is that just because you don't believe something's true doesn't give you the right to be an asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that. If anyone wants to respond to anything else, if not, we'll jump into Katie's tip.
Okay. So early on, I caught Alan. I don't want to say caught, but I found out that he was on the ex-Mormon subreddit, and I was furious. I was really upset because I was like, why are you going to a place where they're just going to perpetuate, this like feeling and hatred of the church? And I felt like it was like an unhealthy place to be. And there are certainly people who, are very angry, and I understand why. And Alan was pretty good about telling me how he needed something that was in the middle. He couldn't have things that were super faithful, and on the other end of the spectrum, he didn't want things that were really angry. And so something in the middle was going to be helpful for him. And I remember he was in one of the Facebook groups. I don't remember which one. It was probably an ex-Mormon Facebook group. And it was our first conference together where like he was out.
Yeah.
And with every talk that was happening, he was in these chat groups talking about it. And I just not understand. I'm like, I don't understand why you need to talk to these people about what people are saying. Why can't you just tell me? But in reality, it was not something that I could, at the time, that I could be a part of, because the feelings were super raw, and I was having such a hard time dealing with that him just dogpiling and telling me all of everything that's happening would have been detrimental to our relationship. Right. So my first tip is that, if your spouse is the one transitioning, you should allow them to be a part of groups that help them. And when I say allow, it doesn't mean like get permission, but I think you need to understand that, you may have your own, at church, or the bishop or a friend, you'll have your own little cheerleader group. For someone like Alan going through the faith crisis, they don't have usually someone to talk to. Alan was lucky enough to have his brother, and so that really was helpful for him. But they need outlets, they need people to listen to them, and they need people to connect to. So for us, it was really helpful for Alan, for those groups to be there for him when I couldn't mentally be there for him.
Yes, I super love that tip, Katie. Oh my gosh, you guys are fantastic. And I really love that tip, especially because when you're going through a faith crisis, I think at least one of the most difficult things for me was feeling so alone. And so to be able to encourage your spouse, or maybe not even encourage, because that's hard, right? It's hard to do that, but to just allow them to find someone or an online forum or something that allows them to have support so that they don't feel so alone and isolated. I think that's amazing. Thank you.
One of the unspoken tips or secrets about these lists is that most of them go both ways.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that I should be given space to have friendships and groups to go to, so should Katie. So we've got a Facebook group, and the purpose of the Marriage in a Tightrope Facebook group is for both sides to be able to interact with the other side in an effort to navigate mixed faith marriage. There is room, or there is a need for different Facebook groups that are more faith affirming and are there's one called Another Testament of Marriage, which is believing spouses in a mixed faith marriage. And that group has a different purpose. It's trying to, how do I keep my faith while still being in a mixed faith marriage? Those types of conversations don't really happen in our Facebook group.
Yeah.
And so I understand if Kattie or another believing spouse needs to be in a faith affirming Facebook group, even though that's not what I'm about. Like, I'm not worried about that, but Kattie could be. So all of these tips, if you just put yourself in the other person's shoes, they certainly apply both ways.
Yeah.
So the tip number 2.
Oh, and also we'll link your guys' Facebook group. That sounds amazing.
Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yes. And then number 2, let's hear it.
So a lot of the mixed faith marriage wins are going to occur because of what Kattie likes to call fierce conversations, direct conversations that hit a problem or a difficulty just head on. So one of those conversations is tip number 2. You should ask your believing spouse what they value in their participation in the church, and then support them in that. And the answer could be a wide variety of things. When Kattie and I were sitting out in the backyard and I asked her, like, what do you value in your participation in church? At
the time, I was the primary president. So this is all happening well.
She's since been released due to apostasy, but she was in for 3 years. So she had served her time.
I've served my time for sure.
But at the time, I asked her what she valued, and her response was all primary based. It was, I love helping these children. I love teaching them. That's the way that I feel I can serve my neighbor, is by taking care of their kids. And, and I'm putting a lot of words in your mouth, but that's the general thought that she talked about. Anything to add with what you said? Well, I just
felt like, I felt like my service to the kids was like my offering to God, basically. I felt it made me feel good, and I felt like I was making a difference.
And my response isn't going to be, well, it's illogical to think that God wants you to serve because God is a figment of your. That's not helpful at all. You can ask your spouse, what do you value, and then support him in that. So, not from then on, it had already been occurring, but what I tried to do was, okay, what are you doing in primary this week, and how can I help you? Whether that's, for a while, it was putting videos on thumb drives and getting the TV from the media closet and putting it in the primary room and getting that all set up so she didn't have to worry about that. Other times it was dressing up as Moses and being Moses in
all the grunt work.
Okay, let me just clarify. We've got the ex-Mormon dressing up like Moses, and we got the Mormon brewing coffee. This sounds like a really cool relationship.
Oh, it's funky.
We've come a long way.
It's very evident by how you step out of what you're doing to try to show love and appreciation for the other person's values. That's so awesome.
Right. And look, there's discomfort in some of these moments. She asks me to load a video, and it's on the priesthood restoration, which I've spent hours trying to understand. And I'm like, oh, this is hard. Do I say something? Do I not say something? Do I support her? Is it supportive to question this? And so it is mixed faith marriage can be summed up with how to deal with discomfort. I mean, and how to live in that discomfort. There's a lot, and I'll tell you, just Eastern thought and meditation and Buddhism, secular Buddhism specifically, has worked wonders for both of us, really. It's been key anyway. Nice. So that's number 1, is support them in the best way that you know how. So if the answer is, I value the temple and I value you being there with me, there may be some problems here for men, and maybe not for all couples. That would have been a problem for me. Even though I had a temple recommend until August of last year, I haven't been in a few years because of all of this. And so you just have to have that conversation.
And I think we talk about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. So the golden rule is do what you would want done to you. But platinum rule is do what the other person wants.
Do unto others as they would have you do unto them.
Right. So, it might be uncomfortable for Alan to do some of these things, but, like Mother's Day, like he asked a neighbor to come and serve us sacrament, and we haven't had sacrament in months. But he knew that would be something that would be special for me on Mother's Day, is to have someone else come and do that. And I was super appreciative of that, because it's not necessarily what he would want, but it's something that I would want.
Well, and I just have to add to that, because I think this is so beautiful, because obviously, like, you have to have this balance of not putting your values aside, but it sounds like all of these acts you guys are mentioning are like something that it's like very, I'm doing this out of love and not to like shut down my own values. Like, I'm doing this to be loving and supportive of someone who I really care about. So I really love that. I love that.
Yeah, and we still have so many core values in common, right? So, so much of this is just what we already believe in, serving each other, loving each other, that type of thing. So, it absolutely goes along with that. I'll get to my second tip. So, I think that it is easy to feel like the victim when you are the one who has this happening to you, right? You are hurting so badly, and what you don't usually realize, because you're just so sad, is that your spouse is hurting just as much as you are. Yeah. And it's for different reasons, but Allan just talked about that discomfort, and there's a lot of pain. So number two is, if you can acknowledge that you are not the only one hurting, and that you both are hurting, but for different reasons, that helps validate their feelings as well. And that's needed, because we both feel so isolated, we both feel so lonely, but we're both feeling the same things for different reasons. And that should be something that should bring you together and not push you away.
Yeah, and I think that's a great tip for, again, even not just a spouse, but like if you're ex-Mormon and your parents are still Mormon, like remembering, because it's so easy for us on the other side to say like, oh, they're just hating me with their Christian love. Like, and again, I'm just kind of being a little silly, but it's like remembering that, okay, you're hurting and your pain is real, but they're hurting too. And they have their reasons that they're hurting, and it doesn't make them bad or wrong. Like their pain is also real to them. So it can be, you can have more compassion, it's needed on both sides, really. And so I love that. Thank you.
Number 3, to support your believing spouse, ask what their fears are with your newfound beliefs and validate what they say. So this conversation's happened a few times, but on my birthday of 2018, I cannot believe it's been that long since we had this conversation, but so a little over 2 years ago, we were out to dinner for my birthday, and I asked her, like, what are your top 2 big fears with where my beliefs are now? Number 1 was, you're going to want to drink alcohol. Number 2 is, you'll stop attending church. This was 2 months into our podcast, so we're working through these things as we're recording them. But she said those 2 things, and knowing that was her big concern, it kind of allowed me to prioritize where I could, or where I should kind of let my behaviors change versus, all right, can I hold off here to show her some compassion, knowing that these are the big 2. Can I hold back a little bit here? It's not, the word authentic comes out a lot in post-Mormonism. Mm-hmm. And I blow that trumpet all day. I think it's really important to kind of be true to who you are, but that's what marriage is. It's sacrificing a little of yourself in order to show your spouse that you love them and show them that that they are just as important as you are. So for me, it was, okay, I'm not in a huge rush. I can do that. So I didn't have a drink until 13 months after that conversation. And when I finally did have a drink, the reason why I did is because that fear had she saw that I was putting forward that effort. Maybe I'm speaking for you in this
well,
regard.
I think that there's a lot of fears, like, that people go into their second adolescence after they leave the church, and they kind of go, like, oh, I've never been able to do any of this stuff. And we've seen it on both sides. We've seen people go crazy, and we've seen also people like be very moderate and understanding. Some people that don't even change their habits. They just are like, meh, not for me. And so, yeah, my fear was, of course, the worst case scenario, that he would have this like second adolescence and just go crazy.
And I didn't. I don't think I did.
No,
I don't think I did.
No.
Yeah. So I mean, my first drink was, I had thought about it for 13 months. It wasn't like a constant thought, but it was, okay. I had this big, in April of 2019, I had this big successful project completed at work. So I told Katie, I'm like, let's celebrate tonight on the trampoline. And
we had just found out that the house that we had like put in offers for, like we had got the house that we wanted. Yeah.
So there was a couple of things that lined up in our favor, and I'm like, let's celebrate on the tramp tonight. And I'll get you some Martinellis and I'll drink something else. And that's how I put it, kind of testing the waters. And she said, okay, let's do it. And I went, oh, all right. So I went to my neighbor's house, who I can see out the window because we just moved from 2 doors down. So I'm at my neighbor's house, who they've never been members. It's the funny, long story short, is they've been with us this entire faith crisis. So they were, when we moved into the neighborhood, I was all in, and then I started to have a crisis, and they were safe because they've never been members of the church. So I talked to them about it. And so I went over to their house and was like, tonight's the night. I'm having my first drink. And they're like, oh, let me give you something. And so they like ran in and gave me a little vial of.
No, it's not a vial. It's a mini bottle.
I keep calling it a vial.
It sounds more evil when you say vial, though.
They gave me a beaker of Fireball. And I know a lot of your viewers are going to say like, oh, what kind of, that's your first experience is going to be Fireball. But it was. And so we went out on the tramp, and I drank it. She drank her Martinellis, and I kind of narrated her my experience of like, yeah, it burns in my mouth. It's really sweet.
Oh, it's going down my chest.
It's the warmth is permeating throughout my chest. And I wanted, and knowing, 36 years of being an all-in Mormon, I knew what kind of things would be going through my mind if the roles were reversed. Yeah. So I went into that first experience thinking, I want this to be a non-event. So I just want to drink this one little thing. I assume because I'm a 6'7" large male that this is not going to get me drunk or even tipsy, and it didn't. But I just want this first experience to be blink. All right, let's go inside and let's watch The Office or whatever we're going to watch that night.
Oh, The Office. Nice.
It's either that or Parks and Rec,
Yeah,
it's our go-to.
Way to go.
Those are the two big ones that we're watching.
Yeah. And Katie, how was that experience for you?
I mean, I knew that he wanted to do that. But I mean, I think over time, one of the big things is that he proved to me that, one, he was trustworthy and he wasn't going to do anything. Actually, this leads into the fourth tip. So I'll save that for Alan because I felt like he was trustworthy, and it really was a non-deal. Like, it wasn't a big deal. And then after that, I mean, he had, I don't know, a drink here and there with clients. And then, when we were at dinner, but it really hasn't been an issue. So
that's so cool. That's cool. I think he helped ease you into it. Jared did not ease me into it, but that's another story.
Well, this like ties into my third tip, which is to be patient, because on both sides, a lot of patience is needed. I think that when you are the spouse who is not in the faith crisis that's supporting someone who is going through it, you think that maybe things could be solved in a couple of conversations, and it's not. It's going to take time for them to heal and for you to heal. And so, I always tell people that you just have to give it time. Time solves a lot of things, and it's really hard to be patient. It's hard to have those conversations over and over and over again. Yeah. But after time, you get to this place where we are, 3 years later, totally different, like night and day difference.
Although where everything's perfect and we never have any problems.
Well, yeah, we both still get bristled by things, but we can talk in a much more open manner than we could before.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's both been positive. Do you want to talk about your fourth one? Because it goes right into what we're talking about.
Yeah, it does. It's don't hide behavioral changes. There's more to lose than to gain if you're hiding some of those behavioral changes.
Mm-hmm.
The big one that I hid, which is stupid because she's going to notice right away, is garments. I stopped wearing garments without really having a conversation with her. And I mean, not only do I see her in bed every night,
you get dressed in front of me, you shower in front of me.
All of those things, but also, what happens when she does the laundry when I'm in the office and there's no white in my dirty laundry. And so that was a big deal. I don't want to minimize it. That was really hard. And that was early on before we started recording the podcast when that change was made. There is some responsibility on the believing spouse when you go to them and say, I'm going to stop wearing garments and this is why. If there is a big blow up, and it's understandable to be emotional about these types of things, but if there's a huge blow up, what is likely to happen the next time a behavioral change needs to happen? You're going to hide it because you're trying to stay away from that explosion. So there's trust on both sides, and there's leaning into the discomfort on both sides I'm going to trust her with this change that I'm going to tell her about. And she needs to trust me by giving me some of that understanding reaction rather than, she can be upset. It's not about hiding your emotions, but it's about feeling them and then responding in a way that doesn't make me want to hide things any further.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that I think these all are like woven together, because my fourth tip is to allow your spouse to speak their truth. Now, this doesn't mean that like Allan can just say whatever he wants, whenever he wants, right? We go back to the first tip of him saying, this works or this doesn't work, right? So you definitely have to think about your language when you do speak your truth. But Allan has been really good about saying things that are important to him. And also, I've been able to say things that are important to me. I think that it's important that you both recognize that there should be boundaries. If there is a topic that is like raw and you constantly blow up over, maybe you need to take a time out. Maybe you need to think about it. Maybe you need to send each other some articles. Maybe you need to listen to a podcast. There's a lot of things you can do in preparation. And, usually springing them on, these types of conversations, springing them at the end of the night when everyone's tired or about to go to bed is usually not the ideal time to talk about them. So there are tactful ways that Allan can speak his truth to me with giving me a little bit of preparation. Hey, I would love to talk to you tonight about this subject. Would you feel comfortable with that? Okay. All right, let's set a time limit. Let's not have this go for 4 hours and ruin our night. There are definitely things that you can do, but it is important for him to be able to say how he is feeling, because although you no longer agree with maybe doctrine of the church or anything on that plane, it's still important for someone to be able to express to their closest, deepest friend, their spouse, how they're feeling or what triggers them. But it should, just like you are allowed to speak openly, they should be allowed to speak openly as well.
One example of this would be, we were in Hawaii for a big family vacation we had planned for a few years in order to afford. And this was just in December. And we were in Hawaii, literally at the resort, when the bombshell of the $100 billion that the church has in Ensign, what's called Ensign Reserve or whatever.
Peaks.
Ensign
whatever.
Peaks, yeah. That big bombshell came out and all the details. And, I wanted to talk about that with her. I don't want to ruin our vacation that we've spent all this time and money trying to go on. So I could have,
Yeah.
I knew that Kattie was in a better place to be able to discuss some of these things because we've been kind of practicing that for a few years. But I could have gone in guns a-blazing and saying like,
look what your church did.
look at what the church does. They can't even pay janitors to clean the church buildings, but they've got $100 billion just sitting by the side instead of helping people. It could have been that, but instead it's using that language in the first tip of, it's really difficult for me to see people suffering and to see, these jobs could be given to people and the church could do so much more than they do, understanding that they do a lot of good. It's just very difficult for me to see them sitting on all this money that could be used for so much better purposes.
Right.
That's still not going to be easy for her to hear perhaps, but it's a lot better way of using some of this charged language of this proves it's a fraud and they're just in it for the money and those types of things.
Right. Well, I feel like this is so important because ultimately as human beings, we just want to be heard. And even if someone doesn't agree with us, we just really want to be heard. And when me and Jared were in a mixed faith marriage, because he left first and then I left years later, it was like, it was so much of that charged language for a while. Well, and I mean, honestly, Jared was pretty good. He was much better than I'd say someone typical who doesn't know better, but it was the defensiveness for me was even if he was being really sincere, I'd be like, nope. But I think what we learned was to just take the emotions out of it and just listen to each other. And then my walls really started to come down because I realized that his concerns were so sincere. He was like, I just don't understand. And this is why I don't understand. And it wasn't like he was trying to pull me away like I originally thought. And once I let the walls down, it was like, oh, I really feel for you. That's really hard what you've been going through. And ultimately, no matter what your spouse is going through, they need that. You know what I mean? We all need that. We just need to be heard, and you don't have to agree to listen wholeheartedly to someone, Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest wins and the biggest personal gains in a mixed faith marriage is you learn to do that. And that permeates through all aspects of your life where you don't see things black and white. I mean, you look at what's going on in the world today with all these, looting and riots and protests and racism. And it's very easy to be so polarized on one side or the other.
Yeah.
But this is one of the things that mixed faith marriage has taught us is that it's not that simple. It's not all right and all wrong. It's somewhere in the middle there. And being able to sit down with literally, and we're getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but we've literally sat down. We interviewed recently on our podcast a neighbor of ours who's still a believing member of the church. So is his wife, but he is Black, she is white. And we sat down with him and just listened to his story about experiencing racism in America and in Utah. And it crushed us. And then a few days later, we were sitting down with another believing member of the church who is a police officer and has been for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
And it crushed us to hear what his experience has been. And we know him and know how good of a man he is. And so it's that ability to sit down with people who you don't always agree with, you don't understand what they're going through, that is so important. And so mixed faith marriage has helped us, I think has helped us a lot to feel that empathy in all directions.
Yeah.
I love that. And I've totally lost track which tip we're on.
I know, me too. I was talking like, where do we go next? Number five. And this goes along with that and is also extremely difficult to do as a post-Mormon is recognize the good in the church when you see it. When there is something that is good, there is nothing more flabbergasting and annoying and eye-rolling than someone that will only see the bad in the church or someone that will only see the good in the church. So if something good happens, if the bishop makes a good decision, if you have a positive interaction with someone that believes, recognize it, call attention to it. If President Nelson says something that is like, oh, well, many times I disagree with what he says, but this was actually really helpful, recognize it.
Yes.
Talk to your spouse about it because and actually this goes towards your kids as well in a mixed faith marriage. You don't want to be the parent that is one track. The second you get alone with your kid, it's, well, son, what do you believe about God? Let's talk about it. It's just like, oh my gosh, Dad, get over it. Like, can we talk about baseball? Can we play Minecraft? You don't want to be one dimensional. So that's really important. If you see something good, recognize it.
I think oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it goes the other way. When Katie has extended that olive branch to me and says, it's very difficult. Oh, sorry. That's tip number 6. Let's go on. Go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to add super quick, just that it takes a maturity to be able to say, like, okay, you know what, this organization that hurt me, that I don't agree with or whatever, it's not all bad, because it's not. That's the truth. It's not. There's a lot that I learned growing up being Mormon that I cherish, and I always will. And it used to scare me to say that, because there's, just like we have stereotypes of being Mormon, we have stereotypes of being ex-Mormon, like you should hate it all. And again, not saying, like, not everyone is like that. It's totally not. But yeah, so I love that. Alan. Thank you. So, okay, Katie, you got it. Number 5, right?
Yeah. Number 5 would be flexible when you're negotiating the tenders. So we talk about tenders as being things that you are now looking to negotiate. It could be temple attendance, church attendance. It could be garments. It could be word of wisdom. It could be how to handle your kids, baptisms and missions, and all of those things. And I think over time, you'll understand why it's important to be flexible. If you are inflexible, honestly, that's not going to work in a mixed faith marriage. One person is going to continually have to be put down, and that's not fair for the other parent. We find that in mixed faith marriage, parenting is the number one source of heartache for a couple, because how do you parent kids in this new way? And negotiating that can be, Alan has been very flexible in how I have wanted to proceed with the kids. But on the flip side, I've been pretty flexible too. Alan stopped going to church with us for a while. And then he came back just for the first hour. And, one thing we talked about, and this was last fall, we talked about is doing like a home church. So we started doing home church the first Sunday of every month. And that was strategic, right? The first Sunday of every month was hard. So we started doing home church last year, and now everyone is catching up to us doing home church.
Who's the
You're
prophet
the real
now?
Prophet.
but that was something that like we absolutely could negotiate, and we got a lot out of, and our kids got a lot out of. And while we've been home, I've really loved having home church. So you being flexible and these are things that you're going to have to talk about, and it's taken us a while, but now I feel like we're in a good groove and we're on the same plane as far as what we want for the kids. So you have to expect that flexibility on both sides.
Katie, I love that so much. And I love that you had the courage to say, you know what, this doesn't have to be like Orthodox Mormon. You know what I mean? We can take what's best for our family in our own hands, and we can do that in a way that works for us, and like have home at church once a month or whatever. I think that's amazing. I totally commend you guys for that. That's so cool.
Part of that being flexible is recognizing that something that works for you today may not work for you tomorrow. Yeah. So church attendance is the perfect example for us, because during my faith crisis, I wanted to be there, and I was raising my hand, and I was saying, well, maybe Nephi shouldn't have killed Laban. And I was having these types of comments, and I wanted to kind of kick up dust and stand for what's right and things like that. That became untenable, as many of us have learned. And so it no longer worked. So I stopped, and I didn't go for about 9 months. And then it was actually because of an experiment we wanted to do on the podcast of like, let's go back to church for 4 weeks, and we're going to record every single week to talk about what our experience is like. And it was at that time I was like, is this important to you? I could do this. I could do this. And I did it for a while, all 3 hours. And then the time change happened, and then it was only 2 hours. And I was like, okay, well, it's been hard going to all the hours. So I'm going to go just to one. And then it was, let's introduce this home church for the first Sunday a month. So you can reserve the right to, we call it, and Natasha Helfer Parker also preaches this lesson of take it to the lab. It's one of the things that we teach in an online course we do in collaboration with her, is just come back and address these things periodically to see if what you've decided is still working. Like we did with alcohol. We came back and addressed it, and all of a sudden it wasn't so painful for Katie. So let's try this. And maybe she would have had a different reaction to me drinking, and I could have said, okay, well, that's fine. I'll only drink on business trips with a colleague, or there's a million different directions you can go with that.
Right.
Yeah. So tip number 6, and the final tip. With these 6 tips, you will never need to know anything else about mixed faith.
Thank God. Oh, good.
And I feel like these tips are like really useful for even those who aren't in a mixed faith marriage, but have like parents and siblings who are still fully in the church. I mean, you can use all of these strategies with them.
Yeah. This
and honestly, even with a marriage where you guys are on the same page, there's some really good tips that take it to the lab. I'm like, oh God, I need to do this. Oh my God. I love it. Okay. Tip number 6.
Yeah.
Alan.
Well, and Morgan, just to comment what you just said, that's why a lot of times you'll hear mixed faith folks say, man, our marriage is stronger than it's ever been. And a lot of the logic goes like, how could that be? That's impossible. Because and that's not to say it's the easiest it's ever been, but it's through working through these challenging times and these problems is where the relationship gets stronger. The relationship doesn't become strong by everything going right. Things go wrong, and you getting through it is what makes it stronger. So, well,
that's what, like, the growth happens in the discomfort. So
and it forces you to communicate about what's really important to you. Whereas maybe, before the faith crisis of the one spouse, there's a lack of communication, but there isn't anything really pushing it, So that's so interesting.
Well, and at the beginning, there's questions on both sides. And in some relationships, again, we're pulling from thousands of conversations we've had with couples, but in some relationships, it's on the believing side, and others it's on the non-believing side. Sometimes it's both. Is this going to work? Is this going to last? Is this what I want? Yeah. And over the course of 2.5 years, we can point at hundreds of different situations where we have shown each other that, yes, in spite of all of this, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you. So now we sit here today not feeling like mixed faith marriage is anywhere near of a threat because we've shown each other that it's not.
But I think, like, when we first started doing this, we were in the business of saving marriages. This is our thoughts. Our thoughts were, no, you can stay together. You have to stay together. But, we also recognize that there was a lot of dysfunction. There was a lot of abuse, maybe in some of these relationships before the faith crisis happens. And then it happens, and then we see, like, them, get divorced. And then we're like, and then we've realized after a year of doing this that, we've seen every outcome is possible, really. Right. But this mixed faith marriage should not be the reason why you get divorced. I understand there are other, underlying issues with a lot of marriages, and but this is not something that should push you out if you have a loving relationship.
Right. I so love that. I love the way you said that, because that's so important. Is like, don't let that be the only reason that you break up, because it's something you can work through. I love that. I love it. Okay, are we on 6?
Yeah, we're on 6. These are good sidetracks. Good sidetracks.
Yes, very good.
Number 6 is don't dogpile if your spouse is ever critical about the church. And there's an if there, because many spouses just won't go there. They won't. But it's so easy when your spouse does go there for you to, if Katie, for example, listens.
Oh, I have a good example.
Oh, go for it.
So when we were in, like, Arizona or something during one of the conferences, and it was the talk that President Nelson gave about sad heaven. Right. And it was, a friend sent it to me, and she said, have you listened to this yet? And I said, no. We were in a hotel. So we sat and we listened to it, like, in bed. And I just sat and just bawled. I was really, really upset by it. And after Alan didn't say a single thing at all.
And for people who don't know what it's about,
Oh,
can you
yeah.
give like a 10-second synopsis of that talk?
Sure. So in the talk, he talks about his daughter who died of cancer, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was on her dying deathbed, what she had done was she had married in the temple. She had, all of our kids had served missions and had married in the temple, and how she'll be able to be with them. And I just felt like it was a really difficult talk for those of us who are in any other situation, right? Other than that.
Yes.
And the fact that we may not see our loved ones again in the next life if we aren't doing all of these things.
Yeah.
He poses that question.
He poses the
question of, when you get to heaven, are you going to look around and say, where's my family? It was a very fear-based approach versus a love-based approach.
It was, and it was really hard to listen to. And I pretty much just cried through the whole thing. And then Alan just held me and rubbed my back, and he knew that I was upset by it, but he didn't start dogpiling. Oh, he is so wrong. He didn't say anything, because the words just spoke for themselves. And so I think that that's a really good example of, like, he had an opportunity, but he just let me feel what I was feeling and be upset by it and not add to that in a negative way.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of two objectives there, and not to think of this like a business decision or anything, but when you don't dogpile, you are showing compassion. And that for me it should always at least be the primary objective and motivation for not dogpiling, is I want to be compassionate towards what she's feeling,
Right.
and not add to it. The secondary objection or reality is that when you do dogpile, why don't you go ahead and why don't you try that and see what happens? Because psychologically walls go up, and this is on both sides.
Oh,
We've had conversations where she'll say something critical, I'll start to agree and add to it, and then the walls go up, and then she's all of a sudden now arguing on behalf of the church.
Right.
And I'll go, what the hell just happened? I was agreeing with you. And so it's, if you know some of the psychology about it, it's a double bonus.
Mm-hmm.
It's, let her have her own experiences. Don't try to push her or pull her in any direction, and just accept her for wherever she lands. And that's one of those direct conversations we've had. We've both said to each other, wherever you go with your beliefs, you can stay exactly where you are or change into whoever you want to change into. I'm here. I'll be here regardless of what happens. Just take the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Oh, you guys, I love it. Giving me the ex-mormon goosebumps. I don't know. Seriously, it means so much to me to hear that, just because it obviously hits home for me, because that's where me and Jared had to get, you know what I mean? Like, we had to get to that point, because it wasn't going to work if we didn't finally just sit down and say, you know what? I love you even though you're not Mormon, and him, I love you even though you're Mormon. And that's when everything changed. When we finally just stopped trying to change the other person and just chilled out. And so that really hits home for me. So thank you guys. And I think, Katie, we're on your number 6.
Yes, my last one. Well, this goes right along with it. I think that I don't know, most couples are like, oh, love languages, like what love language are you? And
physical touch
or service or whatever. And it's funny because, I think you go through two different marriages, right? So your first marriage in this situation is the one where, you get to know each other as young couples, and then you're kind of growing up together. And then the second marriage is where one person decides to go a different way, right? They decide, all right, I actually have thoughts and feelings about this. And, rather than we belong together, we're perfect for each other, I have different ideas, and maybe we're we're living in a marriage where we have our own thoughts and our own feelings and our own likes and dislikes, and it's different from our spouse. I think in the LDS Church we are so good at like talking about being one, right? But as you go through this second marriage where Allan now has different ideas and feelings and thoughts as I do, also your love changes. And, our love became better because we were better communicating. It became deeper. But also I found that, things that I didn't need before that I decided I needed. So for example, I've always been like service-based love, like doing things for anyone around me. But when Allan was going through his faith crisis, I was insecure. I was very worried about him leaving me or him wanting something other than who I was. So all of a sudden I needed him to tell me. I never needed words of affirmation before, but all of a sudden I needed him. I needed him to say to me, like, I'm in this for the long haul. I love you. I want to be with you. I choose you, right? So those phrases and words that mean a lot to us when one of us is going through something that's different than the other spouse, that sets us apart from them. So that's my sixth tip is recognize and acknowledge and ask your spouse what he needs to feel loved or be loved in the relationship, because I feel like it changes in this process. And when I feel that when Allan was giving me those words of affirmation, or I was, doing things that made him feel like I loved him, that just deepened our bond. And then it took the fear out of it that I seriously thought he's going to leave me for someone who accepts him for who he is and will do all the things with him. And that's not necessarily the case, but you have to show and communicate that.
Before the faith crisis, it was physical touch, but after the faith crisis, it's still physical touch.
Still physical touch.
No, feeling the support, Katie showing me her support in what's important to me has been critical. For example, we've, just because of the groups that we run in due to the podcast, we've been, we did 7 hours with John DeLynn, and like the fact that she would do that meant a whole lot to me, because that was clearly hey, could we do this on my side? We sat down with Richard Osler and interviewed with him, who he's a believing member of the church, and he has a podcast called Listen, Learn, Love. That was more a Katie activity. Going to church is a Katie activity. Presenting at Thrive is an Allan activity. Going to a karaoke night with John DeLynn is an Allan activity. There's, in those moments, and sometimes they end, I wouldn't say poorly, but sometimes they end with, man, that was really uncomfortable for me on either side.
Yeah.
That's like, well, thank you for going through that discomfort for me. I really appreciate it. It meant a lot to me.
Yes.
So that's
making
been
it
key.
about guilt or whatever. That's so cool. I have to say, I was looking for you guys at Thrive and I couldn't find you. And it was a big party there. It was hard to find people. And oh dang it, I was gonna say something. I was gonna say about Katie. Katie, I have so much respect for you because and I mentioned to you guys outside of the recording, but I wanted to say it in front of my viewers as well, is that I feel like it's hard to speak out as an ex-Mormon, but what you're doing, I feel like, is even harder, because you're still believing, you still have this value, but you're willing to talk about it. And even being willing to talk about it, there's a lot of Mormons who I imagine have given you maybe a hard time or judged you for that. But what you're doing is so important. It's so helpful. And I have so much respect for you and being willing to come on here today. And I know my viewers are going to respect you as well, because what you're doing is brave. Thank you. And we need to hear your side of things. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on. I don't think I would have said yes to any. I think, 2 years ago, I would be like, oh, no, I don't. No. John DeLynn asked us to come on for like a full year before I said yes, because I'm like, I don't really think I can. But I think that like where Allan and I have landed right now is we're just trying to build bridges between both sides, like help people understand that, you can Mormon however way you decide to, and it's okay. And if that means you're fully in, if that means you're nuanced, if that means you go, once a year, I mean, I feel like that's your journey. And I just wish more people understood that, rather than, placing them in the, oh, you're active or you're non-active, because I feel like there's just so much in between. And the more that you ask other people where they're at, just like Allan wished that people would ask him how he feels and where he's at and why he decided to stop leaving. I think he just doesn't get that. Sometimes I get it, but I mean, getting to know and understand the people around you, especially the people that you love the most, can help bridge these conversations that are so desperately needed.
Yeah. Thank you. Allan, any closing thoughts before I let you guys go to your lunch date?
Not really. As usual, Kattie ties quite the bow on things when she wants to do it.
And for it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Those tips were amazing. I knew they'd be amazing, but I didn't think I'd walk away like, I gotta change everything in a good way. I'm like, oh, I have so many good ideas. This is amazing. I know this is going to help so many people. From the bottom of my heart, thank you both so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Your work is seriously immeasurably valuable. You guys are doing an amazing job bridging that gap, and it is so, so needed. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having
Morgan.
us.
Thank you very much. This has been My Spiritual Life with Morgan Higdon. Oh, wait, you're the host. Sorry, you're the host.
You got it. Just tell them to skip over. You got it.
Like and subscribe. Hit that bell. We're not on YouTube, so I'm not used to talking YouTube terms. Go subscribe to Saints Unscripted on their channel and make a few comments before you get banned like I did. See you next time, everybody.
Boom!